Hello.
Hello, folks. Welcome to Totally Tank, the tankiest podcast in Tankville. It's Saturday, the 15th of March, 2025, and this is episode 68. My name is Rob, and I'm joined by...
Hello, I'm John, and welcome to the show. Today we're featuring Stalin's Hotrods, the BT series. Now, if you're new to the show, hang on. We'll be talking extensively about the tank, but first, some quick housekeeping. And first of all, I just want to thank, we've got quite a few people on the line. If you're watching and you haven't dropped a comment, do please do that, because we do like to acknowledge you. So Hans Vormhut is here from Boston. Alexander Vlad has joined us. Brandon makes stuff from Seattle-ish. Cornelius is at the Belcon and Labour Club. What better place to watch a show about a Soviet tank? Tasman is joining us from Sydney.
Thank you for the compliment about the T-shirts, Vlad.
Yes, John Scholler is with us from Atlanta, Georgia. Now, speaking of the T-shirts, Rob, if you want an excellent Totally Tank T-shirt, beer coaster, coffee mug, or cool hat, all the bits, head over to redbubble.com and search for Totally Tank.
Hello to Collateral Cabbage from Oregon and Military Geek.
Hello,
I did like Alexander Vlad's comment, hello, tank people, beer people, and tank beer people, because we are definitely tank beer people.
Mm-hmm.
So there we go.
Yes.
Hello, all. It's great to have so many people joining us today.
Yeah, it's always lovely. Okay, so if you like the show, hit the like and subscribe buttons. It helps us. Also, whatever platform you're consuming our content on,
Goodness.
whatever platform you're consuming our content on, if you could leave us a good review, that would be great. If you don't want to leave us a good review, then just sod off.
Hey,
Jog on, mate. Beckett, hello. Good to see you again, mate. And hopefully you're not going to get us in any trouble with your dad, but we'll leave that between the two of you.
Jay Bowser, thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us as well.
Oh, Jack, hello. Nice. Oh, sorry, Jay Bowser, different Jay Bowser. Anyway, that's fine.
Yeah, there we go.
It's cool. We like you too.
All right. I'm going to let you do the name of this one. So the name of the tank.
It's the Bystrokodny tank. Because, of course, what is the Russian word for tank? It's tank. So it literally means fast-moving tank or high-speed tank, or known by the nickname Betka from the acronym, or by its diminutive Betushka, or the Fast Tank Type 5.
For the BT5 or the Fast Tank Type 2 or 7 or whatever. All right, stats, fun stats. Designer, J. Walter Christie and the Kharkiv Morozov Machine Building Design Bureau, the KMDB.
Now, I should have looked this up. I'm not entirely sure that was its name then, but it's the same institution's name later. Anyway, it's fine.
All right, produced from 1932 to 1941. They built, now the numbers around here, around 620 BTs for the BT5. Sorry, the BT2s, the BT5s. Somewhere between 2,100 and 5,000 versus the BT7s, which is anywhere from 5,000 to 2,000. So it's a case of some of them got changed and upgraded and mixed around a bit. Then there's the BT7As, which was 154 of those, and the BT7M, also known as the BT8 colloquially, they only made 790 of those. All right, so all that adds up to about 8 and something thousand BTs running around at high speeds. Why? Because it's a fast tank. Right, weight. Started out at about 11.5 tonnes and moved up to about 13.9 for the BT7s, or even up to 14.7 for the BT8s. So
let's keep that in mind when people are judging. Oh, it was a crap tank because it couldn't go toe to toe with the Panzer IV. You know, it's a lot lighter. It's in a different category.
It was to go toe to toe with the Panzer 1 or 2 is what it was designed.
Yeah, and do. Well, they didn't do that well there either, but that's the radios anyway. Yeah.
All right, 5.5 meters long, or a little bit longer for the later models. 2.2 meters wide. Again, a little bit wider for the later models, and 2.2 meters high, or 2.4 for the BT7s. Crew of 3. So it wasn't 2, which is good, but still a little bit light on crews. Still, they managed to get 2 people in the turret, which is better than 1, is the main thing. Armour. Only 6 to 11 mils around most of it. Some of it was only 15 mils on the turret. They did up armour the later models again, putting on some extra armour plates, getting up to about 15 to 25 mils on the front of the turrets. But still not a lot of armour. All right, main armament. Started out with a number of different options. One was the 37mm gun with not a coax, a ball-mounted machine gun in the turret with it. not quite. And then there was another one with
Sorry,
twin.
what's the difference between a ball-mounted versus a coax?
Coax is pointing where your main gun is
Sure.
pointing, so you can basically shoot the same thing with the same gun. Your ball mount, basically you get the chance to spray it all around the place. So
Gotcha.
where your ball mounted gun would normally be in the hull of the tank.
Sorry, ball with 2 L's. Sorry, I was mishearing that as ball.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
And then they had the option of, they also started out with the BT2s of having a twin gun instead of the 37mm gun in the turret, plus the ball-mounted gun. And then they went to a 45mm gun for the BT5s and BT7s. They also tried out some flamethrowers, because why not? Yeah, and even some artillery pieces with 76mm artillery guns. They had the engines. They started out with the M5 400 horsepower engine. They were using petrol engines. And then they went to a 450 horsepower V12 petrol engine. And then finally in the BT8, they finally went to a diesel engine.
But I really want to hammer home here. 450 horsepower, and I believe I've seen that from the 5s onwards, there were a lot of 500 horsepower engines. This was in the mid-1930s. And, you know, that is an enormous amount of horsepower for Western tanks in 1944.
Yep.
Sorry, well, it's a comparable amount, but that was a big step up for them. So whatever the godless backwards Russians were doing, they were chucking engines into tanks with much greater amounts of horsepower. I'm trying to compare this tank with the Cromwell, and on paper, it's not that far away from it, but this is a 1935 design versus a 1944 design.
31, 32 design.
Sure, but with the later models where it got the better stats. And the Russians came to the same conclusion in the mid-1930s that the British came to in 1944, which is to say there's no point having a tank that can do 80 kilometres now, because if you try and turn, the tracks go one way and the tank goes another way. So instead, take that horsepower and put more protection and a bigger gun on, and you've got a much more effective fighting vehicle. But the Russians got through all that in almost a decade before the Western Allies did. It's interesting.
It needs to go fast.
To quote Elon Musk.
It needs to go fast enough, but not too fast and not too slow. There you go. All right, suspension. This is where it all gets the fun part. It's the Christie suspension.
Yay!
It was this is where he made hay for himself.
J. Walter Christie, one of the biggest arseholes of history. Although, considering the arseholes of history we've studied in this podcast,
I was about to say he's not that bad.
He's not that bad, but he was very hard to work with, which is one of the reasons why suspension didn't catch on. But we do have, for those on the video feed, an animation of what Christie suspension actually is, which is offsetting the spring from the center of the axle, and we've taken it from Wikipedia with accreditation. We've not stolen it, but it is an excellent little animation happening behind us to explain Christie suspension. So,
all right, fuel capacity 360 litres or up to 620 litres for the BT7s, which gave it. So it started out with an operational range of 200 k's.
So twice that of what Centurion had in 1945.
Yep. Then with the BT7s, it went up to 250 to up to 400 kilometres range with external fuel tanks, which you could also mount. Speed 72 kilometres without tracks, or 52 kilometres with tracks.
Let's explain without tracks, shall we?
Now, this is the fun part of the tank, because we'll get into this about Christie looked at the tanks of the First World War, and he said, look, the limiting factor of them is their suspension and their tracks and so forth, because the suspension's not very good, the transmission's not very good, and so they can't go very far because they just keep on breaking down. So he said, well, why don't I take the tracks out of the equation and let them run on road wheels? And then when you get to near the battle, you can stop, put the tracks on the tank, and then it can go cross country however it feels like. And so he came up with a design for that, and it worked. So whereby you could take the tracks, they had a 30-minute process to take the tracks off the tank and stow them on.
I strongly suspect that was more like an hour in a practice, but
but it was doable. So if you had a 200-kilometre route march to get the tanks to where they needed to be, you could take the tracks off for an hour, then drive for however long, and get there quickly because you're going a lot much faster than everything else.
Now, just to explain, so it did mean that the leading road wheels needed a steering system so they could turn, and it meant that the driver had multiple steering systems in front of him.
He had a detachable steering wheel that he had in a little cubby in his driving compartment, whereby when you took the tracks off, he would pull out the steering wheel, plug the steering wheel in, and then he could drive along.
Yep.
Quite happily saying steering his tank. And then there was also a chain drive from the drive wheel to
the rear wheel.
To rear wheels to actually give you propulsion.
And that was in the early ones had the chain drive, and then some of the mid-series BTs, they changed a sprocket, and so it was a more direct tooth drive. And then in the later BTs, they said, this is really stupid. Our roads are crap. We need tracks everywhere. What's the point of this? This is extra weight and complication. But, and then they just were fast-tracked tanks.
Yes, but it was a useful design. And if you had lots of good roads, it would have been very useful. But do you know what Russia doesn't have in the 1930s?
Good roads.
A lot of good roads. Does not have a lot of those. Does not have a lot of those. So,
and you can make the argument that in any era, in any time, good roads will be a key target of the enemy. So, yeah. All
right. But the BT-7s, they got up to 86 kilometres an hour without the tracks. So that's pretty bloody fast.
Or 52 kilometres an hour with the tracks, which is still a speed at which any attempt to turn will see the tank and the tracks depart company.
All right, so that's our stats, and we'll throw some more stats later on. All right, design and development.
So I just want to quickly note, Hans has given us big ups for being able to remember stats on vehicles from the 1930s, and the reason is we do actually have a teleprompter that we're staring into, and
I have a piece of paper again with me today because the teleprompter does not like tables.
Yes.
So,
so we have actually written down the key numbers and have them scrolling in front of our eyes. So we're not quite as smart as we look.
We're not nearly as smart as we actually. Well, are we? No, we're probably as smart as we look. Anyway,
we look pretty dumb. So.
Cheers to that.
Maybe we're smarter than we look. Hey?
All right. Once again, we have a tank with a weird and convoluted design and development process. In the 1920s, the newly formed Soviet leadership looked at their military and realized that it was not fit for what they wanted. And came up with a plan on moving the military, the people, and the country, and the revolution. Don't forget the revolution forward. A lot of that advance was tractors and tanks.
Yep. Let's quickly remember the Russians fought an enormous civil war against the Tsar's forces, and they came out of that with a military that had some pretty advanced thinking about how to achieve things in the modern world, much more so than the veterans of World War One.
You mean, and also the People's and Peasants Army, as they were called, or
sure,
whatever it was.
Yeah, but Tukhachevsky was...
They started out being very egalitarian with their military, and at the end, then they realised very soon afterwards,
officers need to be officers, and
you can't do everything,
need to be sergeants.
And everything can't be done by committee. So they actually said, look, that egalitarian communism stuff, which for the military, which can make sure we've got a hierarchy in there, but everyone's equal under the commissars. Anyway, the Tank Archives has a website, has Stalin's translated notes on the requirements from tanks. So they had, a while ago they got all of Stalin's notes and documents and so forth, and they've translated them to English. And Tank Archives has put them up onto the web. And reading through some of those.
Big shout out to Peter Samsonov, you're a top dude.
That's awesome. Reading some of through those was some pretty spectacular stuff. So anyway, this is what they had to say on December 5th, 1929. I should try and do a Russian accent. I won't because I'm Australian.
No.
The project presented the commission was approved. The commission made the following points. The Red Army only has the T-18 tank. The T-18 does not sufficiently match modern requirements. There are no designs for a medium or large tank. The 5-year plan of tractorization and motorization are currently tied up supplying the army and country with powerful tractors. It is necessary to solve the question of tanks and tractor building, as well as receive modern tanks and tractors. No later than December 20th, send a commission abroad to select and purchase samples of large and medium tanks, investigate the possibility of technical aid. The tank building program must be completed towards the end of 32-33. The tank building program for 29-30 must be completed by October 1930. Extend the Politburo Commission until January 3rd, 1930. The Commission must investigate and take measures to complete the plan for 1 year from now and 4 years from now. So they went forth into the imperialist, capitalist, bourgeoisie world looking for tank designs, including the UK, France, and the US.
And it's funny how, there's a joke in communist circles about how the capitalists will always sell the rope for their own hangman.
Oh, and they did.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they were wanting to do.
Yeah.
In the US, they found J. Walter Christie. And what is it with Americans and their single initial first names? I don't know. Anyway.
DJ Trump.
Well, I'm thinking more H. Norman Schwarzkopf.
Oh, well, yeah.
A US engineer and inventor. He had worked on ships, built tractors, race cars, and raced the race cars, and wanted to build tanks for the US Army. He'd seen the Renault FT and the M1918 tanks and how they had to be trucked around as they would break down if they were driven too far, and knew he could do better. So he designed a couple of different versions of tanks for the US Army that took off the tracks to allow the vehicles to run on wheels faster and further, and then put the tracks back on before going over terrain. Just when he was getting a version that worked and met requirements that the Army was after, the Great Depression hit. And the Army was no longer interested in buying his tanks. Because
there was the personality issue of J. Walter Christie was very difficult to work with, which probably had a bit to do with that. And then there is the other issue that external bogies continued to be a great way to build tanks, or a good enough way, and had the advantage that they didn't take up interior volume, and they could be replaced without having to open up the insides of the tank. So while the Christie suspension had some benefits, it did still have significant costs, and its benefits were mostly with high-speed tanks, and everyone figured out they didn't actually want their tanks to go that fast anymore. So
fast enough. Yeah. All right. Luckily, the Soviets and the Poles were interested in 1930, with the US government not really wanting to recognise the Bolsheviks as the Soviet government. It seems strange that they would agree to allow Christie's tanks and designs to be exported, but they did. The Soviets set up a company in the US called Amtorg to allow them to deal with American companies legitimately and spy. These days, they just reach out on Twitter. The Soviets
slide into the DMs. All the other lovely Soviet interference with American affairs these days is just buying podcasters to talk garbage for them. But, we are still awaiting our offer. But,
with so much influence that we have here on the Australian. Anyway, the Soviets were interested in the T1E2 US tank and had placed an order for it. Then they heard about Christie's tank, the M1928, or as he liked to call it, the M1940, because he thought it was 12 years ahead of its time. That's the sort of person he was. And the impressive performance of the M1928. There was much haggling back and forth between the Soviets and Christie, but they came to a deal in the end for 2 tanks, their design, and a license to build them. The 2 prototypes sent to the Soviets weren't smuggled out illegally, but there were definitely some shenanigans with getting approvals. Further notes from Stalin included the line item 4. Line item number 4, the Army Department must give permission for the sale. Minister Samurai, or the Secretary of War, Christie will obtain the permission himself if we send him a letter with an official request. Negotiations were conducted on the April 7th, 1930 at Amtorg between comrades Kalipsky, Gobar and Mr. Christie. So first Christie labelled them as tractors, but then submitted the paperwork for them to be exported properly at the last second, so no one would have time to say no. And this was allowed as the US wanted to get foreign buyers for their tanks, so that they could then subsidise the cost of any tanks they wanted to build themselves. What a surprise! They were also selling off lots of excess Liberty engines for cash. So you had lots of engines that could be put into tanks in case somebody wanted to build.
If you want to build bad tanks, yeah.
The prototypes were not shipped with a turret, as Christie didn't actually have a turret design. He was using a US Army design on the M1928s, so he didn't actually own that turret. The contract he signed with the Soviets included a requirement for a turret, so he had to give some money back, and also some more design details and blueprints and everything else. The Amtorg guys were going into Christie's factories and gathering up all the documentations they could, because they said, well, we bought it, and
and also this might be our last chance before we get deported, was probably on their mind. But yeah.
All right, I'll just fill up this one, and then I'll talk about more excerpts from the tank archives.
It is interesting to see that Stalin was so personally invested in this project. That is something that, I mean, you knew obviously tanks were important to the Soviet Union, but these directives directly from the big guy himself is, I'm finding it fascinating.
All right, so another excerpt from the Tank Archives website of a report of various US officers on the Christie tank trials in the US, which was then provided by Stalin to his close friend Sergei Kirov. It's only an excerpt, as the whole thing is really, really, really long and detailed. All right, putting on my US voice, the officer spent several days at Rueil, starting from November 24th. He observed trials of 2 Christie tanks that were built for Russia. He personally rode in one of those tanks for 30 miles off-road. He found the travel to be light and gentle. The 2 tanks were attached together with little difficulty. I'm assuming that means they were cabled together so they could tow one another. The tank could climb a 43-degree slope of liquid mud with no difficulty.
Which sounds quite impressive.
Yep.
Yeah.
The entire tank with no turret weighs 8 tons. The armour is composed of plates half an inch thick. The internal layer is composed of a soft steel 3/16 of an inch thick. The proposed mass with a turret, gun, crew and armament is over 10 tons. The Russian tank, while moving on wheels, moves using a drive mechanism. The American tank uses a chain mechanism. The officer says that a drive mechanism will allow a much faster process of converting the tank from tracks to wheels. Currently, Mr. Christie is building a tank for Poland. This tank is not the same as the one for Russia. I heard that the contract for that tank had been annulled. The tank would have been finished at the same time as the American tank. The officer considers that the American tank will be finished in about 3 weeks. It will be delivered to Fort Meade and also to Washington, so interested parties may see it. The tank is 5 feet tall without a turret and about 7 feet tall width. The officer points out that there are a lot of car factory representatives were present at the trials. All present rode the tank and were impressed by the smoothness and lightness with which the tank crossed terrain, and had a very high opinion of the individual spring suspension, which, in their opinion, allowed the tank to move smoother than a car.
Well, that's when you've got more road wheels. You should, in theory, be getting a greater distribution, but yeah.
The officer points out that the Polish tank without a buyer can be sold to the government if such is deemed necessary. Uh-oh, John's broken something for me.
Yep, hang on a sec.
Has he turned on the Peltier?
No, it's not the Peltier. No,
well,
we're still live. It'll be fine. So this is the downside of the... Okay, keep talking, Rob. Just extemporize.
Rutabaga. All right. Well, I've got some fun stuff to say later on about... yeah, close enough.
All right.
About Australian rules football. And well, I will say that the totally tanked rugby tipping comp is also going on, and the Brumbies had a good win last night for those interested.
But nothing. We beat Auckland in Auckland, Rob.
I know. Nothing as good as last weekend. Yep. Still, again, beating the Drua and bloody Fiji the other week was another big achievement for us.
Well, we beat the Drua last night
again. All right. Okay, we're getting close. There we go. Stop. There we go. Yep. Keep going and. The officer points out that the Polish tank without a buyer can be sold to the government if deemed necessary and sufficient funding is provided. Babao, who is one of the officers, do you know how the Russian government managed to purchase such a tank? General Farquhar. No, sir. All right. So the report details all the good and bad things about the Christie tank, mostly good, and how the US military kept finding ways to say, no, we don't want that tank. Poland, who had finished fighting the Soviets for independence only 8 years earlier, ended up not getting their tank.
Typical. Just quickly, Colonel Klink has joined us from Indiana, so hello. Medi's here as well. It's all kicking off. Okay, nice one. Sorry, Rob. Continue.
Right. Once the tanks get to the USSR, the Soviet engineers look at it and start work in 1931. Unfortunately, it does not go as well as anyone would like. They quickly built 3 in order to get them onto a military parade. They weren't real combat tanks, only made with mild steel to meet the deadline. One caught fire leaving the factory, and another broke down at the start of the parade. Sounds like a T-14.
It sounds like a tank.
Yeah. Sounds like a T-14. But eventually the production factory got going on producing the Soviet BT tanks and produced over 8,000 through to 1941. Here's another fun little excerpt from Stalin's notes on December 7th, 1932. On the subject of Christie, it was decided that Helipinski should begin talks with Christie to purchase one non-flying tank. If there is a model 1932 tank already built, one should be bought. Christie is not to be invited to the USSR. As I said, it was a weird and convoluted process.
What's a non-flying tank?
Well, he was designing tanks that fly.
Oh, right, yeah.
That was what I'm saying. Christie was not, just because he sold some tanks to the Russians, he didn't stop coming up with new designs. He was going to build flying tanks.
Yeah, it was a different time. The world was full of possibilities back then, wasn't it? Yeah. Now we're all just selling crypto to each other. Yeah.
As I said, it was a weird and convoluted process that was just buying the prototype. Then there was the murder of Kirov. Remember him, Stalin's best mate, in 1934, which allowed Stalin to really get his purge on. After which come the show trials, the disappearances, and the purge of the military hierarchy that leaves the Soviet army in a mess for years to come. These purchases also affected the engineers and factory workers designing and building the tanks.
In particular, Konstantin Chelpan, who designed the KV-2 engine, which continued to power Russian tanks into the 1990s, was a victim in 1938 of the purges, and it's still staggering to think what could have been if he had been actively designing tank engines into the mid 1940s.
But it was the murder of Kirov that really allowed Stalin to get his purge.
Now, I don't want to spend my life defending Stalin, because he was definitely a bad man. But we have to remember that the Western powers were actively trying to corrupt people in Russia with enormous amounts of money and gold. While Stalin no doubt had, I would say, 99 chuck as many nines as you want on there, a number of his victims of the purges were innocent, his paranoia was based on legitimate concern. So it's...
Still a monster.
Still a monster. Not challenging that, but let's remember that the Western powers literally invaded the Soviet Union in 1919. So they had their reasons for being crazy. They were crazy, but they had their reasons.
Alexander Vlad does ask a good question. What Totally Tank T-shirt would Stalin buy?
Oh, it'd have to be the T-34, wouldn't it?
You'd think so. All right.
Or the IS-2. The IS-2 tank's not just for fascists. I think that might be the one. Which I bought one for Sheridan. I don't have one of my own. I should probably get one before. In fact, we definitely need to have those before we go to Armour Fest.
We have to have a lot of things before we go to Armour. Anyway, all right. Plus the question of, once you've got a tank, what do you do with it? Which had been going around for a while since World War I. The Soviets first came up with the term deep battle in the 1920s, which was the bridge between the strategic and the tactical battle, what we now call the operational level of battle. The idea being once you won the tactical battle of breaking through the enemy defences, you push through fast-moving forces to disrupt their logistics and hamper any counterattack. Sound familiar?
I would say deep battle. I'm not disparaging Tukhachevsky and deep battle, and it's a pretty valid doctrine and concept. It's also pretty close to just combined arms or blitzkrieg, or it all turns into pretty much the same thing.
They were the first ones to actually write it down, though.
Yeah.
Right. Also written as emphasising destroying, suppressing, or disorganising enemy forces not only at the line of contact but also throughout the depth of the battlefield. However, the author Vladimir Triandafilov was envisioning horses when he wrote about it. So the question of tanks for infantry support or cavalry once again comes up. So he was looking at saying, yep, he was a cavalry man, and saying, yep, once you've broken the line with the tanks, then you send the cavalry through. The idea of deep battle gains and loses support again and again over the years within the Soviets, but the BT tanks are seen as a way to achieve success in the deep battle during the 1930s with their speed, manoeuvrability, and firepower.
Which does come back to the problem with all these ideas, which is that, it's very exciting that your tank can hair off at 50 kilometres an hour and flank the enemy, but where is your fuel truck and your ammunition supply and your maintenance dudes getting up there to support you? And how long can your tank operate without those things? Well, the answer is not very long. But, it's exciting when it works.
Reading comments and laughing, sorry.
Yes.
All right, notes from other internet sources and references, just to throw them in there. So they did have a slight fire on the move with a stabilised gun sight. The ventilator fan was in the turret was inadequate, making the crew pass out from gases if they fired the gun too much. They had very poor visibility. The engine was quite unreliable. There was a cramped interior because it's a Russian tank. Replacing the springs on the Christie suspension was a long and arduous task, increasing repair times.
So basically, all the wheels, all the tracks had to come off, and then the interior side of the tank had to come off because the Christie suspension was inside that, and it was a lot of work. And basically, springs, they're just bad.
Well,
anytime you've got a spring in your system,
high tensile spring is basically dangerous, and you got to work with it.
They're likely to fail. Yeah.
All right. Lack of spare parts did not help reliability issues. Only 44% had a radio, and the radio was unreliable. There was also no internal radio
so no intercom. Yeah.
No intercom within the tank, so lots of yelling and kicking of crew members.
Mm-hmm.
There was a version with wooden snowshoes with extra wide tracks to go through the snow. Some of them were used as engineering support vehicles, including a small bridge layer, fascine carrier, and a rocket thrower. Right, the Christie suspension allowed 27 centimeters of vertical traverse. That's a lot of things you can jump over. That's why it could go so fast and so quickly, is because it basically took any bump and allowed it to keep on going. All right, it's been given the record of the longest jump by a tank, but there was no mention of the Cromwell or the Universal Carrier or even the Valentine fitted with the rocket jumps capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I think they really need to, if they want to really claim
the question is, what
jump.
Was that longest jump with the tracks on or off as well? Which this is the only tank with that asterisk on it. So.
Well, the one that was filmed and shown on YouTube was with tracks on, but I reckon Cromwell could have done that as well, or a Valentine fitted with rockets.
Not the best use of a Valentine, but
no.
Yes.
All right, the BT2 turret machine gun was not coax but in a ball mount, as I was describing before, and it was at 45 degrees to the right of the main gun, i.e. not directly to the front, so it could shoot out to the sides. The BT2 and the BT3 changed all measurements from imperial to metric.
Good for them.
I was about to say, that's just a case of, yes, we're getting rid of this imperialist
I'm sick of
numbers.
working in foot pounds and 16 1,000ths of an inch.
And the fact that they did it. And I said, look, we're just going to say, all from now on, everything is going to be in millimeters. We'll go from there. Right. The BT4 changed riveted armour to welded armour, also introduced better access to the side springs, and a lever for opening the driver, allowing the driver to open and close engine louvers. Yeah,
which we will get to the service history, but they discovered that people throwing Molotov cocktails into the engine deck was a bad thing they didn't like. And engine louvers were...
We'll have a little discussion
useful.
About where the term Molotov cocktail comes from and the history of that.
True. Molotov cocktails existed before Molotov put his name to them.
We'll talk about where it comes from later on. All right. The BT5 brought in the 45mm gun and a proper coax machine gun. The later BT...
I would actually say the BT5 is actually where the BT series starts seriously.
Yeah, the BT2s, they really wanted to retire them in 1939 and put them all across to training, and they had a really good plan for doing that, saying we'll get rid of these old BT2s, we'll put them out for training, and then something happened in June 1941 that they really had to bring them out of retirement for.
Now, I think we should mention the poll at this moment, Rob.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So we have a poll running in the live stream. We have 15 votes. The options are the BT series were bloody good for their time or communist junk. 13% say they were communist junk, but 87% still say they were bloody good for their time.
Well, you can put me down for bloody good for their time, because that's what I think as well.
Okay. It's one thing, YouTube doesn't actually let us vote in our own polls, which is understandable, but...
I'll just log on now.
Sure.
All right, the later BT7 had another ball mount in the rear of the turret that was designed to take the... You're then designed to take the gun out of the front ball mount and insert it into the rear of the
so you could switch it around.
Yes.
That'd get very exciting in the moment where you had to...
pull out your great
pull
big
it out and get in the... around everyone.
So I don't know why it was designed that way. And they also it also came up with a...
the hub gear for the track removal.
Yeah, also built a hub gear with the rather complicated chain gear system for using the road wheels. But they also put on a external anti-aircraft machine gun. That changed the shape of the hatches on the turret, so it had to be a round hatch for the commander, so he could stick his head out, man the anti-aircraft gun, and it could swivel around his turret as he moved his gun around to fire from the pintle mount.
It's a funny thing because the reality of aircraft trying to attack tanks is that they really weren't very good at it, and the claimed kills versus actual kills was colossally skewed. But tank crews and tank designers still felt the need to try and address, and we've spoken about this before, the main thing isn't that you're going to shoot a plane down, the main thing is you're going to put enough fear in the heart of the pilot that he's going to fly higher where he can't accurately target you. But yeah.
All right. When tracks were removed, a detachable steering wheel was taken from the driver's storage space and inserted in the tank to allow the driver to use a steering wheel. Removal of the tracks wasn't done to exploit speed, but because the lifespan of track links and suspension was very poor in 1928, so that basically allowed them to drive further without the tanks breaking down because of the track links.
Now, every BT I've seen was still using single pin tracks, which, to be fair, you know, the French were still using single pins up until 1940 when their tank production ceased for some reason. But yeah, the tracks weren't great, and it's one of those things we were critical of American tanks until the M4 arrived. But one thing they sorted out by the time of the M2 was some really solid tracks. Yeah.
All right. Lack of a suitable 37mm gun meant some of the BT2s had a twin machine gun and only 2 crew. Some even had the twin machine gun plus the ball-mounted turret gun. And there was the Soviet propaganda movie Traktoristi.
Traktoristi.
All right, in 1938, showing the super abilities of the fast tank BT5.
There
and
you
BT7.
go. Alexander Vlad's been making jokes in the comments about the he's just watching a tractor podcast, but yep, there you go. Traktoristi. I wish you'd sent me a link. We should have found some video of that. Anyway, that's fine. Let's move on.
There you go. All right, operators. The Soviet Union. What a surprise. The Spanish Republic. They had 50 BT5s right along with crew training and Soviet volunteers. Nationalist Spain. They had some captured. Republic of China. They started with 4 BT5s and then were given another 30. The Mongolian People's Republic. They had 15 BT7s. Finland. They captured 53. Hungary had some captured ones. Romania had some captured ones. And Nazi Germany had some captured BT tanks. Conflicts.
All right, now you've got a list of conflicts here, Rob. Are we going to address these conflicts, or are you just going to list them and then we address them?
Well, there's notable. We're going to address the conflicts, and then we have some notable battles that I've written about.
Sure.
So, conflicts: the Spanish Civil War. All right. So, they, as I said, the Republicans were given 50 BTs, and they didn't do very well with them because the Republicans weren't really good at war. They were good at propaganda.
They were good at being better human beings.
Yeah, but they weren't good at war.
No.
All right, Khalkhin Gol. This is the battle between the Japanese forces and Russian forces in Mongolia.
We'll talk about Khalkhin Gol. We've talked about it in the past, but for those who haven't heard us speak on that, Khalkhin Gol is the most underrated battle in the 20th century because it determined the future of Japan's expansion. They got their asses kicked by the Soviets, and they said, stuff it, we're going to head south and destroy the British Empire. And the Dutch Empire, for that
Europeans.
matter.
They basically just target the Europeans.
But if the Japanese had won at Khalkhin Gol, they probably would have kept going into Russia. So that the fate of the world turned on this obscure battle in the Mongolian steppes. Yeah. And
the Japanese also said, well, tanks catch on fire really badly if you use petrol in them, so we'll make all ours diesel.
Yeah, we like diesel better. Yeah.
They actually made an effort there, whereas the Russians said all their tanks catch on fire really easily. We'll just keep going with petrol.
To be fair, the Soviets went harder on diesel than anyone else in Europe. But yeah.
All right. The invasion of Poland in 1939, where there was 1,700 BTs took part. The Winter War against Finland in 39-40. The Great Patriotic War of 41 to 45. Well, most of us would call World War II, but that's what they call it there.
Yeah, it only started in 41 though. What were they doing before that? Oh, that's right, they were invading Poland and Finland. Yeah.
The Sino-Japanese War, which was between the Chinese Republican forces and the Japanese, and the Soviet-Japanese War of 1945, which is totally different from the Great Patriotic War.
I love how Zhukov cut his teeth in the
We'll talk about Zhukov in
Khalkhin Gol. But he started at Khalkhin Gol or Nomahan, depending on what you want to call it, and then he finished his army career back in Manchuria.
Yeah.
And for a guy who was so significant in the European theatre, it's kind of funny that it's bookended by...
he was a man who went up and down with his... the fact that he wasn't purged, because Stalin did not like him, was incredible.
Well, he was too scared. He was too big, too important. And look, the movie Death of Stalin is well worth watching, but the absolute highlight of the movie is where Jason Isaac playing Zhukov twists his chest so all his medals glitter, and he's like, I'm here And I'm not scared of these people.
You want to know a funny thing about that scene?
Yeah.
They didn't put as many medals on his chest.
Oh, they cut it down.
They didn't have as many medals on his chest as Zhukov actually had, because the movie people said nobody would believe he had that many medals, and so therefore they said, no, we'll fill up his chest, but we can't have that many. They had about half Zhukov's actual medals.
They cut it down because it looked better on film. But I'm a little saddened that apparently Zhukov's family are constantly complaining about the movie. They don't like the way it's portrayed.
Jason Isaacs does a wonderful
Jason
job.
Isaacs is a million times better looking than Zhukov ever was. And I feel sad that the Zhukov family can't get behind what is a heartfelt tribute to their
the man who
ancestor.
It was brilliant. Anyway, notable battles: the Spanish Civil War during the
Zaragoza
offensive, or as an Australian would say, Zaragoza. In 1937, the Republican forces advanced with 48 BTs under the command of Enrique Lista. Lista's always.
I was going to say Lista's a bad name for a commander.
You should go off and join the Space Corps. Anyway, the tanks were driven by Soviet volunteers who had just completed a 600-kilometre march to get to the battle. The tanks were then loaded with Spanish infantry as tank riders, which the BTs were not suited for. As they advanced towards the fortified town of Fuentes del Ebro, with limited reconnaissance and without a preparatory artillery barrage, a failure of communications between the Spanish and the tired Soviet drivers led to the tanks getting stuck in the mud and being easy targets for the outnumbered nationalist troops, who destroyed or captured half the tanks with limited anti-tank capabilities. And the attack failed because the Republican forces lacked coordination, supplies, military intelligence, and the commanders wasted troops in order to reduce small resistance points. An American member of the International Brigade said, "Courage and heroism are plentiful in Spain, and the Spanish people have no lack of it. What they need is tactics." And as for tactics, on 13th of October, Regiment BT was bankrupt.
Which is not a criticism of the tank. That's a criticism of the tactics. But,
As I said, I mean, making the drivers, whether or not, didn't actually specify whether or not they were driving their tanks 600 kilometres or they're actually marching themselves 600 kilometres, but it was still a long way to be either way. And then you've got the... what Russian tank driver speaks Spanish, and communicating between the two.
But you get to good commanders account for fatigue. I think it was Pharsalus, one of Julius Caesar's biggest battles. He literally stopped in advance and said, "Everyone's tired. We're just going to sit down and sit in the shade for an hour, and then we're going to keep going after that." And meanwhile, the enemy is standing in their full array in the sun, getting hotter and hotter, while Caesar's troops are sitting in the shade. So accounting for fatigue and managing fatigue is something winning generals have always done in history. And thinking, the troops are tough, they can take it, is a good way to lose.
Yep. Hans, yes, we are dedicated drinkers. We are experienced. Let's just say we're experienced.
Veteran. Yeah, veteran when it comes to drinking. We're not. Well, Rob's kind of a veteran.
What you call. I don't call myself one because I've never actually had to be deployed anywhere. Anybody else is shooting at me. But some definitions of what a veteran is, you could be included. Well, I don't consider myself one just because I've had nobody shooting at me. So I'm really happy with that. I'm happy not having to be.
My dad's the same way. He will not accept the tag of veteran, even though he did 20 years before the mast. But anyway.
All right, Khalkhin Gol. The border between the newly formed country of Mongolia, a breakaway province of China, supported by the Soviets, and the Japanese puppet state of Manchuria, was not agreed to lack of diplomatic relations. The Japanese thought the border was at the river Khalkhin Gol. The Mongolians thought it was 16 kilometres away further at Nomonhan. In May 1939, the Mongolian army grazed their horses on the far side of the river and were chased off. And things escalated quickly.
Yep. Now, just quickly, Mehdi's asking what was it armed with. It was mostly it was a 45mm gun with a good high explosive round, which for its time, that was a very powerful tank gun.
It was a good gun. Even the 37mm gun was good enough as a tank gun. There was nothing wrong with that. Where was it? By late August 1939, there had been 2 Imperial Japanese Army advances, and they were planning on a third when Lieutenant General Zhukov struck first. On the 20th of August, as the ink was drying on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, and bypassing the 1936 Japan Nazi Germany anti-Comintern Pact. So this is a bit of diplomacy going on here.
So basically, because they had signed the Ribbentrop Pact, Germany wasn't going to come to Japan's defense against the Soviets.
Where where Germany and Japan had signed a anti-Comintern Pact 3 years beforehand, saying if we're attacked by the communists, we'll think about helping each other out. So it was a case of, and the ink was literally had just dried on this signing of this thing when Zhukov has taken his 57,000 men, 500 BT-5 and BT-7 tanks, and 550 aircraft supported by 2 Mongolian cavalry divisions in a surprise attack against the weakly defended Japanese front.
Now, you might think the cavalry divisions is a bit retrograde, but these are Mongolian cavalry divisions.
They had horses and camels.
I think in World War II, the Soviets still had 20 cavalry divisions, as in horse cavalry.
Yeah.
I mean,
dude, they're running around in Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah.
There are guys advancing on Ukrainian. There are Russian troops advancing on Ukrainian positions at the moment on horseback.
Yeah. I mean, Australia used significant amount of troops even in World War II in Syria because they can move quite fast through the country. Although you start to have you've got to have your mobile blacksmith, and it gets complicated. But anyway, let's keep going.
All right. The weakly defended Japanese position was manned only by the Japanese 23rd Infantry Division, reinforced by several smaller infantry units. As the Japanese were pinned down by artillery and aircraft, Soviet tanks attacked them from the flank and the rear, achieving a double envelopment.
Double envelopment, this is the ultimate in terms of generalship. To achieve a double envelopment is a complete stuffing of your opponents. And this is against the Japanese infantry, who did not lose many battles ever. That's
quite good. I mean, on the 25th of August, Soviet forces linked up at Nomonhan, enveloping the Japanese 23rd Infantry Division. After failed attempts by the Japanese to break the encirclement, they were effectively destroyed by 31st of August. A few days later, diplomacy kicked in, and the border was finally agreed to as being at Nomonhan, with the fighting ending on the 16th of September. The next day, the Soviets invaded Poland. So they had basically... anyway, the Soviet military and diplomatic offensive stunned Japan. For this loss, this loss knocked the Imperial Japanese Army out of prominence in Tokyo, as their inability to continue spreading north and westward and allowed the Imperial Japanese Navy to step up and propose a naval advance against European holdings in Southeast Asia.
Now, if folks haven't, and I can understand why you wouldn't have, followed Japanese pre-war politics, it was lethal. They were assassinating each other like crazy. This wasn't just, we've beaten you politically, ha ha ha, see you on the golf course. No, it was, we're going to kill you.
Yeah, and they did.
Yeah.
If it was... There's a reason why the Houses of Parliament are 2 sword lengths apart type thing. It's
that's the British Parliament.
But the point being is that politics used to be pretty brutal, even on the floor of what you'd say is
the mother of parliaments. Yeah. Anyway, so the point is that the inter-Nicene conflict in Japan was extremely violent and brutal, a bit like all the people falling out of windows in Russia today. But anyway,
they slipped.
They
slip all the time.
Slip onto the knives, yeah.
You fell on my knife 27 times. All right. For the Soviets, it allowed them to maintain a stable border and sign a neutrality pact with Japan in 1941 and concentrate their efforts in Europe. For Zhukov, he was made a hero of the Soviet Union for the first time of 4 and promoted to general. I've already talked about how he's doesn't have all these medals. Hang on, wait, go back. Sorry, I was wrong. Keep going. With his flanks secured, Zhukov and his Siberian divisions, 1,700 tanks and 1,500 aircraft, were able to turn up at the Battle of Moscow in December of 1941, just in time to stop the German advance. For the BT tanks, the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol was the largest tank battle to date. The tanks' mobility and speed enabled them to carry out the double envelopment of the Japanese forces, but they did so without infantry support. Zhukov proclaimed the tanks were very fire-prone, having lost 250 of his starting 500 tanks. And that committing tanks without infantry, as the BT was not well designed to carry tank riders, made them very vulnerable to anti-tank infantry tactics, even when the Japanese had no anti-tank equipment. What a surprise. Using what would later be known as the Molotov cocktail, first used in the Spanish Civil War by Franco's troops, so it was Franco who came up with it, and given the name by the Finns during the Winter War.
I just want to briefly touch here on, so the Japanese, faced with these tanks and lacking dedicated anti-tank armament, they use their artillery quite effectively, they use their aircraft quite effectively, but the only way they could actually figure out to really deal with the tanks was teams designed to distract the tank and then engage it with literally glass bottles full of flammable spirit, with a lit wick on the top, which we now call the Molotov cocktail. But this is, the Japanese had the troops with the crazy bravery to do it. They lost the battle, so it wasn't that effective.
They did kill a lot of Russians.
They killed a lot of Russians. They killed a lot of tanks. So it's part of this whole thing that if your troops are crazy brave enough, you can do things. I think that's what they call it, heroic effort. But yeah,
crunch and this, anyway. Just so along with that, the Molotov cocktail things, as I was saying, the Finns named it because when the Russians were bombing Finland, Molotov, who was the diplomat, was calling the bombs aid packages that were coming down, and so they were calling the bombs that were coming down were Molotov bread baskets, because Molotov said, "Well, we're providing aid packages to the Finns," and these bombs were coming down. So they became so the drinks that the Finns were then serving back to the Russian tanks were the Molotov cocktails, because they were serving up their drinks for. In opposed to his bread baskets that were full of explosives.
So, I mean, anyway, the name has definitely caught on. If anyone sees someone throwing a bottle full of spirits or petrol with a wick coming out the top, it's just a Molotov cocktail.
Yep.
It's not really how Molotov would have wanted to be remembered, and good. He was a bastard.
Yes. All right, the Finns. During the 1939-40 Winter War, Finland captured 53 BT-7s and wanted to upgrade them in preparation for the next attack by the Soviets, which they knew was coming. As they didn't have very many of their own tanks and no one was willing to sell them tanks, most were kept as they were, as BTs, but 18 were made into BT-42s, a self-propelled gun made from a shipment of 4.5-inch quick-fire howitzers sold to them by the UK. So they built a large turret to fit the gun into and rolled them out. It was good for bunkers and infantry, but slow to reload, not a tank. It didn't have a bow machine gun or a coax or a pintle mount, so no self-defense. They saw combat in 1943 and in 1944 during the defense of Viipuri. A BT-42 hit a T-34 with 18 rounds of heat and failed to disable it. The Finns lost 8 of their 18 BT-42s in that battle, and then eventually replaced them with Stug 3s from the Nazis, who they were allied with at the point. Just don't forget that bit.
The Mannerheim letter is still one of the saddest correspondences in the world, which is the Finnish president, Mannerheim, at the very end of World War II, wrote this letter to Hitler saying, "We're changing sides, and sorry about that." He basically said the German nation will endure, but the Finnish people are a bit more vulnerable. So see ya.
All right, they were top-heavy with overstrained suspension, transmission, and engine. Not enough vision to be suited as an assault gun. Also, couldn't carry its own tools or pioneer tools or bits and pieces due to weight, making it hard for the crews to maintain. The Finns also used a BT-2 turrets as static defence bunkers. They also looked at making a BT-43 APC version, but didn't complete it. Battle of Kalinin. 17th of October 1941. The Nazis had advanced 1,000 kilometres from June 1941, part of Operation Barbarossa, destroying 15,000 tanks, 2,000 of which were BTs, and killed or captured 3 million Soviet soldiers on their way to Moscow. On the 17th of October 1941, the Red Army counterattacked the German-held town of Kalinin. It's 170 kilometres from Moscow, with 27 T-34s, 20 BT tanks, including 5 outdated BT-2s, 10 T-60 tanks, and 4 ZIS-30 tank destroyers of the 21st Tank from the 21st Tank Regiment. Whilst they were not able to achieve their goal of forcing the Nazis from the town, this was one of the most successful Soviet counterattacks conducted to date at that point of the war. For the first time in the Great Patriotic War, a coherent brigade tank assault had been conducted where experienced tank crews assaulted German positions, destroying more vehicles than were lost, which is a good way to carry out battle.
That's the dream, isn't it?
Right. They lost 21 T-34s and 3 BT tanks and a single T-60s, while the Nazis lost many more tanks, trucks, and planes, being unprepared for the Soviet attack. The Soviet tanks columns joined in the end of Nazi supply columns driving towards Kalinin, with no one noticing until they started opening fire. One T-34 went on a rampage and destroyed or shot or rammed 16 aircraft sitting at the airport, and others rammed a couple of Stug 3s, with one becoming stuck on top of the T-34.
There you go.
Yeah, so basically they caused havoc through Kalinin. But as I say, they failed their overall goal. But the main thing was they succeeded in slowing down the Nazi advance.
Anyway, Tasman's had to leave, so have fun at dinner, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the show.
So,
yes, and Alexander Vlad has noticed that I can pour my beer without breaking eye contact. Yes, although I can't advance the telepropter while I do it, so it's always a
I could
a balance.
I'm just leaving it to you for the moment.
Sure, thank
All right,
you.
Models. The BT-1, which is the Christie prototype with no turret. That's the one that first aboard. The BT-2 was the model 1932 with the M5 400 horsepower engine, which was a copy of the US Liberty L12 engine. 3 turret.
Which is what the British put in the Crusader.
It's a much lighter tank. 3 turret versions were produced with one with a single 37mm gun, a 37mm gun with one ball-mounted machine gun, and then the twin 7.62 machine guns in place of the 37mm gun, and a single, and then the single ball-mounted machine gun in late 1932. In late 1932, they modified to the BT-3, but produced under the same designation. All BT-3s were changed to metric, as we were saying before.
Because
the BT-4 was designed with a welded hull and minor changes in suspension. 3 prototypes.
BT-4 welded hull.
Yep.
Western tanks, rivets up. Up until what, 1941?
Yeah. 3 rivets up until 44, 44.
Yeah.
Anyway, 3 prototypes.
Cromwell, damn it.
3 prototypes were produced. The BT-5, this is where it starts getting proper. A large cylindrical turret with a 45mm gun, the coax DT 7.62 machine gun. Early tanks used simpler, fully cylindrical bolted turrets with rear bustled welded on. The BT-6, which was the BT-5 with a fully welded hull, and the predecessor of the BT-7. It was only built as a prototype. Then we go into the BT-7, which is the model 1937 with a new turret with sloping armour. The BT-7M, also referred to as the BT-8, where they put in the new V2 diesel engine, replacing earlier petrol engines.
So the BT-8 or the BT-7M has got the same engine in it as a T-34, which is a 40-ton tank. So this is where the Russians got the idea of way too much power. Let's put more armor and gun on rather than going for higher speeds. Alan's joined us. Hello, Alan. It's always good to see you, my friend.
Yeah. Then there were the prototypes. They built an artillery support version with a 76.2 millimeter howitzer as a prototype. Later, 21 versions were made. 21 tanks were made from the BT-7s. A rocket launcher artillery version equipped with 2 420 millimeter tank torpedoes.
So what's a tank torpedo, Rob?
They're basically, they look like bombs,
right?
Built onto the side of the turret, and pointing at the sky.
Oh.
So I don't know how far they went, but they were like, literally looks like bombs, not rockets. They were bombs.
Okay, cool.
Strapped to the side of the turret, and that would launch somehow.
Yeah, look, as we know, anything that needs a ballistic trajectory is likely to miss. But yeah,
Then there were flamethrower tanks prototypes. There was an amphibious variant with a new hull for a prototype. A remote radio control tank prototypes. The really, really fast version by NF Nizhganov, which had a set of 30 wheels connected by a chain. It was supposed to reach speeds of up to 105 kilometers an hour.
Jesus.
But was rejected due to complexity, and only one mock-up was built. Command version of the tank with a whip antenna instead of the earlier frame antenna. And then the BT-SV2 Turtle or Cheddar Pucker with lots of sloping armour.
Mm.
Variants.
Hey, we got to the variants. Okay.
Fake tanks.
Mhm.
I found out there was a category on Tank Encyclopedia for fake tanks.
Ah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just weird. All right.
Mhm.
Tanks that the internet has made up as real ones. And the BT-4 or BT-VT with a variant 2 machine gun turrets like an early T-26. So you got the 2 turrets on top of the tank. Has been found captioned as a BT-4, but never existed, and the images have been edited.
Now, I just want to. This is a good moment to talk about. I did spend a year in the digital engagement team at the Australian War Memorial, and one of the things that the historians started screaming about me as soon as I started doing things was that every caption on the website was not trustworthy, and to the point that I should never cite our own stuff because it was just stuff.
You have to go back to the original sources.
But even the original sources were all wrong. It's just that everything is people doing their best in the moment, and very little of it gets corrected. So something goes into an archive or gets annotated as being this is a thing, and often it's a drawing that's in a magazine that gets photographed and then that's taken as being an actual thing. It's one of those things that it's really worth just remembering that every record of war is deeply traumatized people doing their best in a moment and with a lot of other things on their task list. Anyway, let's continue.
All right. Legacy, the BT tanks. They weren't the best tanks from 1940, but they did provide the USSR with experience in how to build tanks, lots of tanks, with armour, guns and a fast engine, and how to use it and how to service it. So when a better tank came along, they didn't have to start from scratch. They were good tanks from the 1930s when used effectively.
I honestly think, given the armour protection, poor. Size of the gun, extremely good for the mid-1930s. Even into the early 1940s, that would have been a good gun. And the speed, which definitely means it has to be used correctly. But,
reliability, maintainability, and all that sort of stuff.
The British were fielding worse tanks, fielding from scratch worse tanks in the middle of the war. And that was a period of intense innovation, and they still weren't as good.
I mean, these tanks actually had a HE round.
Yeah. Who'd have thought that'd be useful? Yeah.
And machine guns. Anyway, they were fast. They were good tanks for the 1930s when used effectively. They were faster than other tanks of the era, had as much armour as other tanks, and had a better gun as most other tanks. A 2-person turret was similar to most other tanks and far better than a 1-person turret. The lack of radio and internal communications was a downside, but at least the Soviets weren't keeping secrets from their own crews to stop them rebelling against the government. Looking at you, France. And they led directly to the T-34.
It's really funny how this very light, very fast tank is the direct ancestor of a totally different tank, where they just said, we'll take this engine and we'll just cover it in way more armour and give it a much bigger gun. And,
All right, now we get to the important part.
Gauss Panzer!
Gauss Panzer does feature a BT-5 and a BT-7 as fielded by the continuation in the Pravda high schools. But what was most notable was the BT-42 fielded by the Jocasta High School appearing in the Gauss Panzer movie. After watching the Gauss Panzer movie, many fans travelled to the BT-42 tank at the Parola Tank Museum in Finland, and much to the museum's surprise. Visitors
that would have been so funny, all these Japanese girls turning up at Parola.
Visitors would surround the tank while playing the, I don't want to say this word, Sarah Kivila polka on the cantil. So a song on a cantil, which is the instrument carried by the character Mika in Gauss Panzer. In 2016, a Kickstarter was set up to get a roof built for the Parola Tank Museum, and they raised 82,000 euros, a lot of which came from Japanese fans wanting to put a roof over the BT-42, helping greatly to preserve the tank. As Mika would say in Gauss Panzer, you've got to pay respect to old Christie suspension. Gauss Panzer film, slaps on steering wheel, never underestimate the power of Christie suspension.
The power! Yes.
I mean, you wouldn't pick it, but it happened. It happened in real life. They said, we're going to put this thing in an anime, and then it's going to have an effect on preserving this tank that nobody liked and was not very good, but it's been looked after because these fans loved it. Yeah, away we go.
Now it's time to, on the screen it says we have to refer to Pole Rob.
Look, bloody good for their time. The BT series with 89%. Communist junk only 11%. So some of you, Russian bias. This is definitely true.
Yep. Okay, so now we're going to put you to. We've got 17 minutes of an interview we've done with Kurt from the Australian Museum of Armour and Artillery. We're talking about Oz Armour Fest and also how you come to be a tank collector. We think it's a pretty interesting chat, and so we will be back live after we put this on, and we hope you enjoy it.
On the line with us today, we have Kurt from Oz Armour. He's joined us to talk about the history of the museum and the Australian Armour Oz Armour Fest coming up in the end of August, beginning of September. Kurt,
how's it going, guys?
Great to have you.
Great to be here.
So tickets just went on sale for Oz Armour Fest the other day. They're all coming out. John and I have already jumped on and bought our Commander's Deck tickets and booked some tank rides for the Friday, and we'll be looking to see what we can get on to the Saturday and Sunday. I hope you're looking forward to it. Is the entire museum basically gearing up towards that?
Every year, it's what we all put our energy into, Oz Armour Fest. The workshop guys, they just work flat out to get everything ready. Especially Steve. Steve's been phenomenal. He's resurrected some pretty grim looking vehicles even since last year. We just did an episode on the Gepard. He just finished that, and it had its big test drive, and yeah, that's sounding really good. We've got the T72 in at the moment. Its oil pump is absolutely emptied, the whole thing full of oil, and it's everywhere. So yeah, that should be a bit of fun to get going.
Yeah, not wanting to jump too far ahead, but the Gepard, is anyone trying to take that off your hands and get that back in service? I hear they're in high demand.
Oh man, no, but we could definitely get a lot more than what we paid for it. One of the big issues we've been having has been actually getting parts for any kind of Cold War Soviet vehicle or NATO vehicle, especially Leopards, Gepards, and that sort of family. It's been a real struggle, and it's funny because we had an opportunity to buy some like a spare engine a couple of years ago before it all kicked off, and yeah, those things are just they're not available. So we've got to really take care of everything now.
Now, I've always wondered about the history of the museum. Opening in 2014, suddenly this collection's been put up as a museum. How did it all come about? I mean, it's a strange thing to think of it about in Cairns. I mean, we're here in Canberra, and when I heard about the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum in Cairns, I thought, why would they be in Cairns? I've never heard of this sort of thing. I mean, but obviously it's a huge success. There's so many tanks there, and but how did it come about?
Well, so in a previous life, when I was a bit younger, it was well before 2014. It was probably around 2010 or 2011. I used to work for the director, and he had a different business that he was operating that was doing quite well. And he said, "Oh, Kurt, you're good on the internet. You know, I want a tank." So what do you want a tank for? He's like, I want to go take it up the farm and drive it around and bulldoze trees over and just have a tank. So I was like, okay, all right. And I sort of looked around, and we came across Millweb, which is a bit of an online sort of store for armored vehicles and that sort of thing. But they didn't have like any big tanks. They had like Saladins and Saracens and old guns and that sort of thing. But after a little while, it was actually him that found our Centurion in Perth. I'm not sure how, I can't quite remember, it was many years ago now, but he got in touch with this guy in WA, and yeah, it was the Centurion. We flew over and fired it up, and wow, it's a tank. And then after we got that over, he never did take it up the farm and bulldoze trees over, but it sort of sat in his sort of old workplace. And after that, just word started getting around that someone was there, that someone knew was in the tank community, and yeah, not long after that, I got flown to Bulgaria to look at a few things, like the T-34-85, a Pack 40 in the UK, and just bits and pieces, just sort of nutting it all out. But the trick was actually trying to import these things. They're classed as Category R weapons in Australia, and the federal rules for deactivation were actually different to the state rules for deactivation. And to have Category R weapons in Queensland required, a special safe storage facility and all this sort of stuff, and it was really, really complicated. But yeah, just fast forward to now, and we've got 240 exhibits. So that's APCs, tanks, artillery pieces. It's just gone a little bit crazy, and we've still got some stuff coming as well. But we're running out of room.
But the director's basically saying, okay, was there a reason for opening the museum, or was this a case of wanting to do something with the collection?
He's quite the entrepreneur. So his personal collection sort of started getting rather large, and he thought he was phasing out. He was selling his previous business, and so he thought, I reckon I'll start a museum. And we've all gone,
And because everybody his previous business was based in Cairns, that's where decided to build a museum.
That's basically it. It's home for him, and it is a tourism hub.
I was about to say,
it is a bit obscure.
Yeah, it is. It is from the Australian point of view. It's a very strange place to have an armor and artillery museum. But from a world tourism point of view, it is a very good place to have it. And look, having seen it, it's just amazing what's there. And I just wish I'd known about it sooner and could have taken Dad type thing. But as it is, it's we're really looking forward to Oz Armour Fest, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up with you there. Now, a couple other questions for you is the obligatory. What's your favourite tank? What's your most interesting tank, or you most have a best connection with in the museum that touches you, or you think about when you think about the museum? Whether it was the first one you bought, or the one that ran over your foot, or
No, I haven't been run over by them yet, which is good. It's probably my favorite one. I've got two favorites. So the first one is the Panzer 4D. It's just, when you think of like a World War II, well, when I think of a World War II tank, I think of that grey German stubby little barrel driving around, but it's got an original engine, original drive line. It's fairly complete. On the inside, not so much, but it wouldn't take much to fully deck it out. But I recently drove that one and the T-34-76, and that was just so much fun to drive. I'd never driven a tank before, and I've worked here for quite a while now, but that was the first tank I got in and was like, holy, it's like, I'm not a rev head or anything like that, but that I suddenly understood what all the fuss was about.
So that's really interesting, because by reputation, the T-34, obviously we've never driven tanks, but by reputation, the T-34 has a pretty bad reputation as being hard to drive. But you reckon it was fun?
Oh man, no! Like the power got when you put your foot on the accelerator was just, it was awesome. The Panzer IV, I think it may be because it's original transmission and engine. I felt kind of a bit afraid driving.
You don't want to break it.
I don't want to break it. And the German stuff is, it is robust, but they're not making the stuff anymore. You know what I mean? So yeah, tricky to maintain and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the T-34-76, it was just, awesome. Yeah.
So with the event coming up at the end of August, how do you think the event will go in the crowd sizes that you got expecting about after the last couple of years, or anything
Oh
special going to be
yeah.
happening for it?
So this year it's the Stug 3G that Bo has been working on will finally be running. It will absolutely be running. It's really close now, and that is going to be just awesome. That is going to be really special. It's a bit of a shame only Bo will be driving it because it's going to be really nice to drive, but it will be really nice to ride in as well. You'll because it's got the front of it, the transmission differential, um, uh, oh my god, drive sprockets, all final drives, they're all original and they've been fully reconditioned. It's going to be smooth as butter. It's going to be a really authentic experience if you get a chance to ride in that one. Yeah, and it's been years in the making.
Yeah, the list of World War II vehicles, because we bought our tickets just the other day. That is an unbelievably impressive list of vehicles you're going to have running around on the Friday.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
I
I've got it
didn't
here
think it
in
was
front of me.
possible.
Well, yeah, and the fact they're all under one roof and that you can kind of ride in them all. That's what makes our event kind of different from like Bovington's or Overloon or those other ones in Europe. Like this is a one-stop shop for some really iconic and special vehicles. Yeah.
And what other tanks are in the process of getting built up at the moment that will hopefully be available on for the weekend to run around? I know, yeah, as we said before, the Sentinel's being worked on. Whether or not that'll get up and going,
That that
that's a
one that
point of contention, or whether or not there'll be other things. What other
But
ones?
that one probably wouldn't be ready in time. That one will be quite a few years away yet. I was a bit cheeky when I did that video, but the point is it is salvageable.
Yeah. And look, there's, I mean, a lot of people aren't going to know about the Sentinel, but from the Australian point of view, it's our tank. It's
It is our
the
tank.
one tank that we actually built, and so it'd be nice to have a one up and running. Yeah.
Look, I agree. I've been lobbying the director to get that show on the road, but he's holding firm. He reckons we've got other projects ahead, that take precedence, like like the KV1 or another
Uh,
Stug or all
And
these silly things.
will the Type 95, as you were saying before,
Type 95.
will
Yeah.
that be up and going by the thing, or we don't know yet?
No. So Daryl and Jesse, they're working on the Wesp at the moment. That's the German self-propelled artillery piece on the Panzer II chassis. That one will probably be 12 to 18 months. So they'll still be working on that during Oz Armour Fest. Bo will have finished the Stug and he'll be on the Stug 3B, which is the early war Stug by that point. That one's I don't think that'll be ready, but it'll be close, hopefully. And then one that I would love to see going that may be up and running will be the Chieftain, depending on if we get a bit of assistance. Yeah, the British Chieftain.
Can I just ask a quick question on the Sentinel? Are you putting a different engine in, or are you going to try and get the triple Cadillacs going?
We'll have to. We tried to on the vehicle. We tried on the vehicle when we were looking at it for the video to have a bit of a look. But to get a proper look, we'd have to take the deck off, and where it is a bit tricky. Couldn't get the forklift in. So to have a proper look at the engines, we'll have to take the deck off and then pull them apart and yeah, really dive into them to make sure. But if we can, we'll use the original engines for sure. But otherwise, yeah, there's three packs in there, so there should
Yeah.
be there'll be alternatives if we need to stick them in.
Now, while we're up at Cairns for the event, we're going to try and organise a pub night. Can we interest you in coming out to the pub with us on probably the Friday night, John? Yeah, or are you going to be too busy with cleaning up
Look,
after the event?
yeah, we'll be cleaning up after the event, but I'm actually a new daddy,
Oh, there you go.
I just had my first child in January, so he'll still be a little bubby boy.
Yeah.
I'll probably need to, I'm calling in. I'm calling in that weekend as a special favour from
There you
the
go.
missus. So
I just wanted to put the invite out there, so it wasn't going to miss the opportunity to invite you out to the pub if you could come
I tell
along
you
with
what,
us.
the boys in the workshop would definitely love to hang out, and the guys in the museum as well.
That's right.
I'm sure we could probably tee something up.
That would be lovely if we could get some people coming out, because we just want to come out after the
Hang
event
out.
and talk tanks and how much fun we've had during the day. That's
Are you
always
guys
what
coming up earlier at all by any chance?
we'll be up on the Thursday, but we'll be hanging around for the Monday probably.
Yeah, nice. Definitely, it's very exciting on Thursday. There's a real buzz of anticipation in the air, whereas
of,
as we sort of
of what's
driving everything,
working,
preparing it.
of what's working and what's not.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of fast, stern looks as people walk by. You know, oh, this isn't working. Oh, shit. So, but on the Monday, it's very relaxed, and we're hosing things down and that. So, try and get both days if you can. That's yeah, you can see the contrast.
Right. All right, John.
Yeah, no, I think we've covered everything we need to cover. I guess, Kurt, just aside from Osama Fest, which is a very special thing, can you just give us a rundown what the visitor experience is like, and the offerings you guys have if you're getting visitors any other time?
Gee, any other time we've got the shooting gallery downstairs. It's a 50-meter underground shooting range basically, and we have a bunch of World War II rifles. Yeah, you can shoot. We've got a joyride vehicle, which is either a converted FV432 or a Humvee, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, you could spend days here walking around reading all the plaques. As I said before, 240 exhibits. It's yeah, if you're into tanks and artillery, there's really nowhere like it.
And I mean, the tanks aren't the end of it, because you've got very big self-propelled artillery pieces in there as well, don't you?
The P-on.
Self-propelled artillery, towed artillery, half tracks, APCs. Yeah, there's
Manhards.
Panhards. Yeah, the Panhard. Oh my God. Yeah, geez. We have a lot of requests to get that running. Man, if only they
That's a
knew.
very complicated machine, I gather, but
Yeah, it's complicated, and yeah, it's in a pretty
French and
terrible state.
wheel. Yeah.
French, a cool vehicle. Like you
Mm.
can't deny it's pretty clever. The oscillating turret, really, yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I think we'll get the Sentinel running before we get that running. How about that?
nice one. Well, Kurt, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in August.
Likewise, fellas. Thanks so much for having me. Hey.
You bet. And thanks to Kurt from the Australian Armour and Artillery Museum for the interview. Looking forward to catching up at Osama Fest in August, and we're seeing if we can get more involved in the festival than that. So we'll see what happens.
So now is the time we need to thank the patrons, which I haven't put in the teleprompter, so that's a problem. But we will
We were supposed to finish the beer so we could do
our best
beer
job.
review.
Yeah, here we go. While we finish the beer, so patrons: Brian Jenkins, Chicago John, Chris Peze, Cornelius Weber, Johnny Oot, Late Apex. Those are our top tier patrons. There's a few more: Anton Gorbanov, Carter Heller, Christoph Keller, Dan Sepienza in our not the top tier.
Apprentice tier, we call it.
The apprentices, that's right. We've also got Late Apex, Matsy Mist, Monty Mace, and Pear in our top tier. David Mulvaney, Elliot Spicer, Floaty Burb, Guy Hook, Hans Wang, Henry Hamed. It's just coming around again. Give me a second. We'll get
Normally
everyone
in.
in.
The teleprompter,
Yeah,
so
but I just forgot.
It was
Jay Beckman Strauss, Jamie Stokes, Red Rum 216, Russell Phillips, Scott
Red
12,
Rum.
Steve Matthews, and Tony L. There we go.
Well done, John.
All of the patrons, thanks.
Guys, awesome. thank you so much.
Yeah.
Artists of Fatigue get their interview early and ad-free, video and the audio of the show.
And while we were upstairs, while the interview was playing, we sold another T-shirt. It was one of the Tiger ones, which is one of our best T-shirts. We've also sold a lot of mini skirts in that design, but yeah. Anyway,
I know I'd wear one.
Yeah, if I wore mini skirts, I'd be totally there.
When?
I don't think I've ever worn a mini skirt, Rob. I've done a lot of things in my life, but maybe I should. Maybe I should give it a go. Let's see how it feels.
All right.
Yes.
Now, you got to say that bit.
Yeah.
Finish your beers.
So Patreon, Apple Bastardry. So we really love our patrons, and I get every now and then somebody like, "Oh, I've been listening to you guys for 6 years, and why don't you give me a shout?" And it's like, well, because people who give us money, it's money. We like getting money.
Or jump in the comments.
Yeah.
Jump in the comments. We love talking about people in the comments. People got
come onto the live stream and jump in the comments. You get a shout out, or for $3 a month, you can get the podcast advertising free, and for $10 a month, you can get the interview in advance. So these are your choices. But we are human, and people who give us money, we have more love for than folks who don't. But we love all of you. We do love all of you. Yeah.
Alex use all. We love use all.
Yeah. So the point we're trying to get to here, though, is that do not join Patreon on the Apple app, because then they will tax it. Get on a web browser, even on your iPhone, and go to patreon.com and sign up for Totally Tanked. And then your money will go more directly to us. Patreon takes a cut, but they're pretty reasonable. So,
rather than Apple.
Yeah. Apple are not adding any value there, so we're happy to say let's bypass them.
All right.
Oh, Jesus, beer review, Rob. Oh, hang on. Oh, God.
Beer review. We used to have a song for beer review. We've lost that.
We did, but we didn't actually have the rights to it,
okay.
I didn't want to get sued by the Dreadnoughts, who is one of my favourite bands. So
invite them on.
We should invite the Dreadnoughts on, actually. Yeah. I'm going to try that. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Because people did love the song, and it's.
I could sing it for us if we went.
All the
not your lager ale.
all of the Dreadnought songs are good. Yes. So Rob, what have we got here?
We have a Czech beer. Mm-hmm. It's a Royal Pale Lager, Imperial, from the Czech Republic. Mm-hmm. And my question was, when I was looking and saying, hang on a second, if it's a royal beer, when was the last time the Czechs had a king?
Mm. Well, King Wenceslas is the most famous of them.
Yes, but King Wenceslas looked after across
and then they became part of the Holy Roman Empire, and then it was all electors rather than kings. And
so I thought, well, that looks interesting. So we'll give that a try.
So it's the Krusovich.
I'm glad you said it.
Royal Pale Lager, which it's got Imperial on it. It's in a
imported royal beer.
It's in a tall boy, which we like. We like the tall boys.
5%. 500 litres. 500 mils.
It doesn't taste good, Rob.
Does it?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. It's a tall boy European lager, and
it tastes like a lager.
There are better lager hops than what they put in here. It's bitter in the wrong ways. It's earthy in the wrong ways. I'll drink it. But we've had beers on this podcast that we did not drink. But this is okay. But I'm not coming back to this with my own money.
There you go. All right. Well, 100% Czech. Mm-hmm. Original recipe since 1581. Mm. Right. So maybe that's when
1581 is a bad time to take a recipe from. The ingredients have changed enormously for the better.
I do like the defenestrated, the non-defenestrated. Yes. I do love the defenestration of Prague.
Well,
number 1 and 2.
I don't love that they got defenestrated, but
I think it's freaking hilarious that there was 2 of them. There was 2 of them, and they had not just one defenestration of Prague, but 2.
I'm glad you're taking joy from the misery of human beings, but yeah.
Well, at least they didn't get eaten like the Dutch did. Mm-hmm, right? When they threw the Catholics out the window in Prague and landed on a pile of manure and called it a miracle that they survived. Whereas in Holland they ate them.
The 30 years war.
At least their arm.
The 30 years war was a very bad thing, but we did find out how evil Swedes could be. So that's important to bear in mind. Mm. Now, in important issues, if you've already watched this far, you'll be aware that now I've got a T-shirt in the works. We need to talk about it more, but the artificial intelligence, whenever we say Oz Armour Fest, writes it as Ozama, as in Ozama, which is hilarious, and so we're thinking of doing something with that. But Ozama. Anyway,
okay. Oh, wait, look.
So 29 to 31 August 2025 in Cairns. We are going to be there. We're going to be going to the pub. If
There'll be money over the bar.
There'll be money over the bar.
If you're wearing a Totally Tank
t-shirt, there'll be some drinks in it for you.
Yeah.
But more to the point, we're all going to hang out. We're going to watch the, if the tank biathlon's happening in Russia at that time of year as it normally does, we'll be into that too. So just saying, Cairns, Australia, which was interesting talking to Kurt because he's like, we're a tourism hub. And he's like, he's completely right. And for the rest of the world, Cairns is the easiest bit of Australia to get to.
But from Australia,
it's a long flight.
way north.
Yeah,
and you go there for the Great Barrier Reef rather than a tank podcast. But we're doing both. Who knows what we're going to do? Yeah. Anyway, we're going to have some fun there, and we're going to look at tanks. We're going to talk about tanks. We're going to sit on the peon.
Anyway, so that's the big thing we're saying. We're going to be there. We'd love to see you there. And Rob is ready to buy you a lot of drinks.
Yeah.
So
money on the bar.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving into things happening in the
world,
the roughly world of tanks.
Because this is we have to live in the world, and sometimes we have to talk about the world, even no matter how bad it is.
Because also, as we say, tanks are political.
Yes.
Yeah. Other people like to pretend we can talk about tanks without talking about politics, and we think they're wrong. As you've probably been aware, when the Syrian rebels stormed out of the north and deposed Bashar al-Assad, all of our media were talking about, oh, isn't this great? Syrians are so happy. Look, they're having music festivals. These things could never happen under the evil Assadist regime. And don't get me wrong, Assad was a bad guy and
dentist.
Yeah, well, obviously a dentist. But Assad was a bad guy, not questioning that. But the issue was that the Syrian rebels had always had a saying, the Christians to Beirut and the Alawites to the grave. Because the Alawite minority was the Assadist power base. And it was a thing that the French left behind where the Alawites were the administrators. And what is now happening in Syria is that the CIA-backed rebels are starting to genocide the Alawites, and the Alawites, when they try to resist, are getting condemned by the European Union because they're just all alone with no friends on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, it's a pretty messy situation when the now government forces are going into the Assad-held areas and slaughtering civilians, as well as the people, the military, ex-military people who are fighting for Assad, fighting back against them. So yeah, it's bad. It's bad. We don't like it.
But it was also predictable.
Yes. Yeah, and Alexander Vlad, you're right. The Syrian situation is a lot more complicated than that. It is. It is really complicated. We cannot do it justice. But what we really want to do is not have people, and I'm talking about not soldiers, just women, children, and people, men as well, not being murdered because they live in the wrong town.
Oh, and they were born in the wrong family. Yeah. But hey, the world is going terribly to shit right now, and this is just one part of that. So Ukraine without America, it's on again, off again. So definitely,
it's a Ross and Rachel situation all over the place.
We're going to talk more about the Australian Abrams as we go on, but it's the moment when the Americans turned off the intelligence, and there were quite smart people being like, oh, does it even really matter? The Russians have circumvented. It's like, yeah. The Russians circumvented the US intelligence by, dispersing their forces and paying enormous operational costs to make themselves less vulnerable to good intelligence. And the minute the intelligence was turned off, the Russians were trying stuff. They were getting very creative. I mean, there was a great quote in one of the Warzone articles that's on the screen for those on the video feed, where the Ukrainians were like, oh, the first thing we knew about their attack was when it happened. And that's the difference between having intelligence and not having intelligence. Because if you've got intelligence, you know the attack's coming. If you don't have it, the first thing you know is when the attack starts.
And it's not like the Ukrainians were paying for their intelligence they were getting from the US. They would like to have gotten it cheaper, but once it was cut off, makes life a lot harder.
Yeah, and we'll get to the cursed breakout the Russians have got undergoing right now, which is quite a thing. I do want to clarify, because we copped some criticism from some people from last month's episode talking about Ukraine. And that for what little it's worth, my opinion is that the Russians are the belligerents in the Ukraine war.
Baddies.
And in a fair war, Putin would end his days in prison for his crimes in starting the war.
Like Duterte from Philippines?
Yeah.
Maybe he will.
Alexander Vlad's asking about AUKUS. That's coming up, don't worry.
Yeah.
But we do not live in a fair world. And Ukraine does not have the power to roll the Russians back. And despite their heroic defense, they are still losing ground. So as bitter as the pill will be, they're going to have to give up territory to Russia. Lots of people can die while they come around to this position, or fewer people can die if they come around faster. And as much as I loathe the Trump administration, this isn't one of the many things they're wrong about. Many people from the Biden administration to Boris Johnson have also used Ukraine for their own agenda, and I think that sucks too. There's not a lot of fairness in the world right now, and the Trump administration intends to make it significantly less fair than it needs to be. Trump is demolishing the world order America built since 1945. This might actually be the rest of the world's chance to make something better, but a lot of already disadvantaged people are going to suffer to get there, and by a lot, I mean billions. And, to put some personal context on this, right now the US is threatening further tariffs against Australia for having a pharmaceutical benefit scheme which makes crucial medicines affordable to all. It keeps my mother alive, and it keeps me alive. And even on the other side of the Pacific, this is getting pretty existential. For those living in Canada, the situation is even more dire, with Trump's repeated threats on their national existence. King Charles isn't idly getting about in his Canadian decorations. The Kanzuk stuff that's been talked about doesn't make any sense as an economic grouping. But if the US is checking out of world leadership, it's a starting point for shared values. Anyway, that's what I've got to say on that, and I don't want to get that off my chest. Thanks, folks.
Will Ukraine ever receive Australia's 49 M1A1 Abrams tanks? It was announced in October last year that Australia would provide them, and 2 weeks ago, the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, said they would be. But I saw one report saying that they've been sent to the US to be defurbished. That's a word I like to make up. And
so they're taking out the advanced gear and making it low tech.
And so that now they are caught up in the US freeze of aid to Ukraine. But I could be totally wrong, and that was Russian propaganda. Let's hope.
In the last few days, while they're waiting for Putin to agree to Ukrainian accession to the ceasefire, apparently they have turned the aid back on. So that's something. But yeah.
All right. My other one was Donnie asking AUKUS who? And Pete Hegsworth only interested in saying the check cleared. Like any dealing with Trump, he's when we're talking about AUKUS, we're talking about the subs that Australia is going to pay at a minimum $360 billion over the next 30 years to buy old British and American nuclear submarines. Like any dealing with Trump, he's going to keep the money and not sell us the subs and think he's won the deal.
Well, he's right, because
he loves winning the deal.
But the deal as written is so appalling that we literally this year spent tens of billions of dollars improving American shipbuilding, but we have no guarantee under the deal that we will ever actually see anything for that. And mind you, when you remember the complete moronic dickhead that was Scott Morrison who signed this deal, this should not surprise anyone. But Donald Trump, being one of the most terrible
people in the world,
card sharps that ever existed, is going to look at this deal saying, so they give us money and we don't have to give them anything, and they're going to say, yep, and he's going to say, awesome, let's not give them anything.
He's done it every day of his life. He's saying, if somebody's giving me money and I don't have to give them what they asked for, what they paid for, why would I give them what they paid for? That's how he lives his life. Anyway, he'll justify it by saying that Australia is finally paying for all the defence that the US has been providing for the last years, and whatever government is in power in Australia will keep on giving him the money because they know the moment they stop kowtowing to they'll be ousted from power, as has happened time and time again in Australia. John had a good article the other week.
I've got an article on Medium, if you want to look up John Griffiths on Medium on that. The issue is the focus in Australia is always on the Whitlam government that was deposed for upsetting the Americans. But if you actually understand Australian politics, John Gorton before Whitlam, who was from the conservative side of politics, was essentially deposed for trying to bring it about an independent defence posture, continuing forward. Turnbull, Gillard, Rudd were all deposed from power for going against American interests. So we have a problem in this country that our leaders are terrified of upsetting America, and at the same time, we have an American government that is terrifying and needs to be opposed. And how we as a country get out of this, we don't actually know.
Maybe by...
dealing with the internal politics is the hardest part.
Up against the walls, bloody guillotines. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, Kursk.
So Kursk, the Battle of Kursk is raging on, which is not something we ever thought 2025 would offer us. The biggest issue is that deprived of American intelligence, the Russians have done some audacious counterattacks and are threatening to pinch off the Ukrainian Kursk salient. And I mean, some of the stuff they did, like marching troops down a gas pipeline, was, clever stuff. And in particular, to get down the gas pipeline, they had to empty it of gas. They had to fill it with oxygen. They had to set up staging points with supply caches. And at that point, you'd think the Ukrainians might want to have been monitoring what was happening in the gas pipeline. It's like, it's been filled full of oxygen. Wonder why that's happening. Maybe we should, blow it up or do something different. But anyway, so
they're playing the war in the regards of we're not going to be such utter bastards, I guess. But
anyway, so Kursk is in play. Obviously, the Russians are trying to adjust the line of control as far as they can before the final settlements are made. And that is normal for anyone in a war.
Eke out the last. Spend as much blood as you can to get out the best territorial advantage before the time of negotiation starts.
But they're blowing through 40,000 casualties a month. A quarter. Anyway, 10,000 casualties a month. It's enormous for most countries of the war, but if you want to fight the Russians, you've got to accept they are willing to take casualties in a way that
they're going to spend the blood.
Western powers don't. I don't think the Chinese would be willing to take casualties at the rate the Russians are.
I reckon they would.
Their leadership might, their population's got other views. But anyway.
Now, to a topic really to provoke discussion. Should ex-Australian Aussie rules football players, let's say young men, 24 to 25 years old, with an injury or two, and may not be able to run as much as they did as an 18 to 24-year-old AFL player, some of whom have been clocked running 20 kilometres or 12 miles in a game which is about 100 minutes long, be banned.
I think Rovers often run marathons in 2 hours.
I think it was actually half marathons. But I looked for that stat, and I'd heard that previously. That
we heard it when we were playing the game, and our coaches used to tell us, "You got to run marathons."
Yeah. Anyway, should they be banned from trying to become a US college football punter? The punter in the US American football team doesn't need to do a lot of running, but you do have to be able to kick a football really high and really far. With most US college football teams having an Australian punter on their books, there is a push on the NCAA, the North.
In College Athletic Association, I'm thinking
on keeping these dang Aussies, out of the scholarship contention.
To be honest, a 24-year-old Australian AFL player has no interest in getting a university degree. That's not why they're there. They just want the money.
But some might say get good, but others might think that the US college is there for US kids. Personally, I think they should get good, but it's not a hill I'd die on and can be persuaded otherwise. So it's a question of these young men, because Australia doesn't have a college competition. Basically, they're recruiting out of high schools for these football players. So they're going straight from high school into professional ranks, and after maybe 5 years, that might be their shot at money and career, and then they have to go on and do something else afterwards. And if that something else afterwards is a US college career of being an a punter, and then go on to a further career into American football, that's great for them. But should it be one of those things that are saying, well, all these damn Aussies taking up spaces that American children should be? I don't know. It's just one thing that I think should be discussed, John. Why isn't there more discussion about it?
Well, Alexander Vlad has pointed out that Canadians do like to club baby seals, and for that reason they should be invaded and their country should be eliminated.
2 baby seals walking to a club. That is pretty funny. All right. All right. Volkswagen.
Now, Volkswagen, this is really funny. Rheinmetall is buying Volkswagen plants and repurposing them to tank production. So if you want to get a sense of how the world is lurching towards conflict, Volkswagen plants becoming tank factories.
They were going to be shut down because the automotive, there wasn't enough demand for the cars. Yeah. And so Rheinmetall has turned around and said, you know what? It's heavy industry. We can deal with that. We can do something with that. I mean,
Rheinmetall's currently forced to build tanks in Australia because they don't have enough capacity. Sorry, not tanks, AFVs, boxes, but yeah.
Rheinmetall is laughing all the way to the bank. They've since Ukraine has kicked off because they have made so much money. Now, look, somebody's saying, look, with all the extreme sport that is the spider, snakes, and crocs that can kill you in Australia. I read a fun one the other day that the crocs in the Northern Territory have where there used to be one croc every kilometre.
Their population's booming since we stopped murdering them all the time.
Yeah. But it was awesome. So the crocs have gone on from they don't bother eating fish anymore. They're eating the feral pigs and water buffalo. The feral water buffalo, and there are so many crocs in the rivers of the Northern Territory. We'll probably see some in Cairns as well. If there is a river,
there's a crocodile farm just next to the tank museum.
I was about to say there is a river beside the tank museum, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were crocs in it. So don't go walking around the track, is what I would say.
Now John Schuller's saying "Count me out of Australia," and John, let me tell you, most Australians live in a country that is still quite a large country.
It's huge. I mean, it's as big as the continental USA.
Yeah, but
you think Texas is big?
Oh, yeah.
It's not. It's only as big as our 4th biggest state.
Yeah, but the point is that most of us live in a belt of temperate climate that is quite pleasant. So
even though it's 35 degrees today in the middle of bloody autumn.
Yeah, but we're in an unair-conditioned basement, and it's not too bad.
The spiders are fine.
Yeah, the spiders are good. Just leave them alone. They'll leave you alone. Yeah. Anyway, I think we are at the end of this podcast, Rob. Unless you've got more things to say.
No, I got some beers to drink, and I got to talk on and on. But I'm not going to be talking about tanks, so I don't think anybody else wants to.
Have we got more to say about the king wearing his Canadian decorations?
I did like that as a real signal to saying, yep, the empire is still here. And look, let's face it, if anything happens in Quebec, I'm sure the French will be coming across, providing support straight away.
It's interesting that the French have said that they consider Canada as a NATO treaty ally to be covered by their nuclear defence umbrella.
Oh, nice, because France isn't actually part of NATO, and so they
they are part of NATO. They have been since the 1980s. But anyway,
I thought they jumped in and out.
No, they're definitely back in right now. The question is, Britain has not said that they consider Canada part of their nuclear defence umbrella, but it's terrifying to think of. Is like, are you willing to? Because if France launches nukes at Trump's America, then that's the end of their country. It's the end of everyone who lives in their country. It's the end of a lot of people who live in the US as well. But this is nuts. Why are we talking in these terms? It's kind of terrifying that the British haven't said that Canada's part of their nuclear umbrella. And here in Australia, it's absolutely terrifying. We look around saying,
I think we need to start developing nukes. That's the one reason.
Well, because Australia is the only country in the world that tested nuclear weapons and walked away from them. And we walked away because the Americans said, we don't want you to have nukes, and we will cover you with our nuclear umbrella. And we also are the only country that had an orbital rocketry program and shut it down because the Americans said, we don't want you having that on your own. So
maybe we should revisit those.
We are now in a position where we need to reopen our nuclear and rocketry programs. We need to buy some German submarines.
I hear we've been funding up some nuclear rocketry, nuclear scientists anyway.
Yeah, we've always done that, but let's not talk about that. The other thing we need to do is start buying some fighter jets from the Swedes because we cannot trust the F-35s to work for us in the future.
I did see some of them flying over Canberra the other day. That was nice.
They're cool.
Yeah. I know, they were cool. The thing is, they couldn't turn up for the Queen's farewell. But,
it rained that day, Rob. Anyway, the point is, like Hush Kit, which is a great blog, just in their description of the British military aviation position, like, Britain's a bit fucked, because the F-35 is untrustworthy now.
What, Elon can turn it off with a bit of a software update, can he?
Yeah. Well, Elon or anyone else, or big balls, It's, anyway, we all need to not be so American. And I know that the majority of our audience is American.
We love you. And guys, we love you.
We love you personally, but right now your country is arresting people for protesting against genocide, and you are the baddies. And I guess I just really hope that our country is not going to be on your side, and that makes me very sad because we've been together for a long time. But this is awful stuff. Anyway, hopefully good stuff happens in the future. Alan, yes, think harder. We'll try. All right, folks.
Take care, all.
And
see you in a month.
See you in a month.
Keep tanking.
See what's happened. But buy your tickets to Oz Armour Fest because we're going to have
when
a lot of fun.
When you're over here, you can ask for asylum.
Yeah. All right, here we go.